You're tuned into 22 Crime, where the truth hides in the details. Together we dive into the darkest corners of human nature, exploring the mysteries that have left investigators puzzled and families searching for justice. Because in the world of crime, the truth is never as simple as it seems. Imagine being in love for a decade with someone who doesn't exist. Every message, every phone call, every shared moment, a part of a life you thought was real, and then one day it all shatters. The person you trusted, confided in, even planned a future with, was a lie. And today, we unravel that labyrinth. From the first innocent message to the final confrontation, we'll follow Kirat's journey through this nightmare, her fight for justice, and the haunting question that remains unanswered. Why? But to understand how this elaborate charade unfolded, we need to go back to where it all began. The clock is ticking. Let's uncover the truth behind today's mystery. Viewer discretion is advised. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. It all began with a single notification, a moment so ordinary it barely registered at first. A Facebook message, one of those familiar dings we've all heard countless times. But for Kirat Assi, this message would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would unravel her life. Kirat, a well-known radio presenter in London, had everything going for her. She was deeply rooted in her Punjabi Sikh community, with a flourishing career and a reputation for being dependable and well-respected. She was someone people looked up to. But even the strongest foundations can crumble when one seemingly harmless connection turns sinister. It was June 2010 when Kirat first received the message. It was from a man named Bobby from Kenya. He wasn't a complete stranger, more of a vague acquaintance from her extended social network. In a tightly knit community like hers, it wasn't unusual for people to be loosely connected through mutual friends and distant family. Bobby fit right into this picture. His first message was friendly, almost casual. "Hey Kirat, I think we might have some mutual friends." Innocuous, no red flags. Kirat had no reason to be suspicious. Bobby appeared polite, articulate, and personable. They exchanged a few pleasantries, and their initial interaction seemed like typical social media small talk. But as the days turned into weeks, the conversations grew longer, more personal. Bobby became more than just another online acquaintance. Kirat found herself opening up to him, sharing her thoughts, her struggles, her dreams. Bobby had a knack for making her feel understood, all while never appearing intrusive. For someone like Kirat, whose life was often filled with the noise of a busy career and social obligations, this new connection felt like a breath of fresh air. Bobby told her he was based in New York, a cardiologist of Kenyan Indian descent, much like Kirat herself. They bonded over shared cultural values, life experiences, and soon, their conversations became part of her daily routine. He made her laugh. He was supportive when her days were tough. It wasn't long before their friendship deepened into something that felt more intimate, something that, to Kirat, began to resemble love. For Kirat, who had always approached relationships with caution, Bobby seemed like a rare gem. He was a man who appeared to understand her without having ever met her in person. Over time, she let her guard down. They talked about their future together, about meeting one day. Bobby shared stories of his family, his work, and his life's challenges. He was an open book, or so it seemed. But as the months passed, small inconsistencies began to surface. Bobby's life was riddled with mysterious illnesses, sudden emergencies, and plans that always seemed to fall through at the last minute. Whenever they made arrangements to finally meet in person, something would happen, a family crisis, a medical emergency. And while Kirat's instincts occasionally raised a red flag, Bobby always had a convincing explanation. His charm and seeming sincerity kept her doubts at bay. Kirat convinced herself that life, after all, could be unpredictable. Long-distance relationships were hard. She told herself there was no reason to be overly suspicious. People went through difficult times, and Bobby's circumstances, while unfortunate, didn't seem entirely implausible. But what Kirat couldn't have known was that the Bobby she thought she knew, the caring, charismatic man she had grown to love, was a lie, a meticulously crafted illusion. And the puppet master behind this elaborate deception, someone far closer than she ever could have imagined, her own cousin, Simran Bogle. For nearly a decade, Kirat had been trapped in a relationship with someone who didn't exist. Bobby wasn't real. He was a fictional character, a figment of someone else's cruel imagination. And behind this web of lies was Simran, orchestrating an intricate hoax that would unravel nearly every aspect of Kirat's life. What started as a simple Facebook message spiraled into a vast, elaborate scheme of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. Bobby wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a cast of characters, friends, family members, all invented by Simran to maintain the illusion. Kirat had no idea that her entire relationship with Bobby was part of a much larger deception, one that had taken years to construct and would take even longer to unravel. As their relationship grew, so did the complexity of the lies, pulling Kirat deeper into a reality that was anything but real. And although there were moments where the cracks began to show, Kirat could never have predicted just how deep this nightmare would go. At first, everything felt real, normal even, but as months passed, Bobby's life started to twist in increasingly bizarre directions. The man Kirat had grown to care for seemed to be caught in a series of misfortunes that left her both concerned and confused. Little did she know, she was being lured into a tangled web of lies, a web that would only grow more complicated and darker with each passing year. It all started with Bobby's health. Suddenly, Bobby wasn't just the charming man from New York. He became someone chronically ill, suffering from one life-threatening condition after another. First, it was heart problems. Then, it was strokes. Before long, he was fighting cancer. And every time Kirat pushed to meet in person, Bobby would fall ill again. His health was fragile, he explained. He needed time to recover, and Kirat, now deeply invested, sympathized. After all, how could she press him for a meeting when he was fighting for his life? But the illnesses didn't stop there. They only escalated. Hospitalizations became frequent. Doctors' appointments multiplied, and surgeries piled up. It was always something, some new crisis that kept Bobby from coming to see her. And with each new excuse, Kirat found herself sinking deeper into the emotional mire, determined to support him through his struggles. Because this was love, wasn't it? Love meant standing by someone, even in their darkest hours. Bobby's health woes tugged at her heart, making it impossible for Kirat to give up on him. But his health wasn't the only thing that kept them apart. Bobby told her he was also in witness protection. Yes, witness protection. He claimed he had crossed dangerous criminals while helping bring them to justice, and as a result, his life was at constant risk. This, he said, was the reason he couldn't travel freely, the reason he couldn't meet her face to face. His very survival, and even hers by association, was at stake. Kirat's heart broke for him. She wanted to be by his side, to help him through his pain, but Bobby always kept her at arm's length. Whenever she questioned his reluctance to meet, he would remind her of the life-or-death stakes of his situation. His health, his safety, it all seemed so real, so urgent. And Kirat, torn between love and doubt, found herself trapped in a never-ending cycle of hope and despair. Yet, as time wore on, her questions grew louder. Why wouldn't he let her see him? Why did every attempt to meet face such dramatic setbacks? But before those questions could take root, Bobby's world expanded. He wasn't alone. He had a family, a close-knit group of friends, and even doctors, people who corroborated his stories and supported his claims. One by one, these new characters began to infiltrate Kirat's life. First came Bobby's family. There was Jay, his brother, who often spoke with Kirat, offering reassurances about Bobby's health. He described Bobby's medical struggles in vivid detail, adding layers of authenticity to Bobby's claims. Then came Yij, another cousin, sharing the weight of Bobby's crises. And there were others, each new character introducing themselves as part of Bobby's support system, each backing up his side of the story. Kirat heard from Bobby's friends as well. They spoke of the risks Bobby was taking to communicate with her at all, despite his precarious position in witness protection. They told her how much Bobby cared for her, how desperate he was to be with her, but how the circumstances kept him away. The doctors, too, joined the conversation, medical professionals who described Bobby's treatments, his surgeries, and his recovery process in detail. They urged her to be patient, reassuring her that Bobby would come to her as soon as he was able. Kirat's voice, barely a whisper of frustration. "Why can't I just see him? I want to help." With every call, every message, Bobby's world seemed more real, more tangible. These weren't just anonymous online personas. These were real people with voices, backstories, and personal experiences. They confirmed every part of Bobby's saga, leaving Kirat with no reason to doubt them. But what Kirat couldn't have known was that none of these people were real. Not Jay, not Yij, not the doctors or the friends. They were all fabrications, creations of one person, her own cousin, Simran Bogle. Simran wasn't just pretending to be Bobby. She was playing the roles of all these people, crafting a multi-layered fiction so intricate it would fool anyone. She used voice notes, phone calls, and texts to build a whole world around Kirat, weaving lies so tightly that Kirat had no way to unravel them. Simran had become a master of deception, playing each character flawlessly to maintain the illusion. But even the most convincing stories eventually start to crack. Slowly, Kirat's intuition began to stir. Small details didn't add up. Bobby's medical emergencies became more frequent, the witness protection excuses more far-fetched. Her frustration grew. Something wasn't right. The nagging feeling in her mind grew stronger. The life she had been pouring her heart into, the love she thought was real, it all began to feel off. Deep down, Kirat knew something was terribly wrong. The cracks were starting to show. Kirat wasn't ready for the truth that was about to come crashing down. But the world Simran had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. The lies that had imprisoned Kirat for years were slowly but surely about to be exposed. For years, Kirat had ridden the emotional roller coaster of Bobby's life, his medical crises, his disappearances, his promises that never materialized. Every excuse, every missed opportunity to meet, she had accepted without hesitation. Love, after all, can blind even the most vigilant among us. But as time wore on, love wasn't enough to mask the creeping sense of doubt that began to stir inside her. The first signs came during one of Bobby's many hospitalizations. Kirat, ever compassionate, kept up her support from afar. She checked on him constantly, offering her love and encouragement as he faced yet another health crisis. But as the months passed, something about his relentless string of illnesses began to bother her. Why hadn't they brought them closer? Why hadn't he ever allowed her to be by his side, especially when he needed her most? And then there was something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. Every time she pushed for a meeting, every time she wanted to see him face to face, Bobby's health would dramatically deteriorate. His voice would grow faint, his messages tinged with desperation. It was as if the very act of wanting to meet triggered another life-threatening episode. It was becoming too convenient. Kirat's voice, tight with frustration, echoed through a voice message. "Why can't I come visit you? I don't care if you're sick. I want to be by your side." But there was always a reason to keep her at a distance, a surgery, a complication, a new threat to his safety. And though Kirat wanted to believe him, the coincidences were too many, the pattern too predictable. Something felt wrong. It wasn't just Bobby's health that seemed off. His stories of witness protection, his tales of dangerous criminals and life on the run, they began to sound more like the plot of a movie than a real-life ordeal. One moment he was recovering from heart surgery, and the next, he was dodging death threats from shadowy figures. His life was a storm of chaos and danger, but somehow, Kirat was always kept on the periphery, never quite allowed into his world. Then, in 2018, came a turning point. Bobby promised Kirat what she had been waiting for all along. He was coming to London. After years of heartbreak, of unfulfilled promises and endless excuses, he was finally going to be near her. This, Kirat thought, would be the moment that changed everything. And yet, nothing changed. Kirat was excited, her heart racing as she prepared for his arrival. She tracked his flight, watching every update with anticipation. When Bobby finally landed in London, she could barely contain her emotions. After all these years, she believed this would be it, the moment they would finally meet, the moment all the waiting would be worth it. But once again, Bobby had an excuse. He told her he was staying at a luxurious hotel in South Kensington, one of the grandest in London. But even though he was just a short drive away, he still refused to see her. His health, he said, had taken a sudden turn for the worse. He wasn't ready to meet. Kirat's voice, soft and pleading. "You're here. Why won't you see me? Please, Bobby." But his response was the same as always. More reasons, more obstacles, more heartbreak. Despite being closer than ever before, Kirat was still on the outside, left waiting and wondering. Frustrated and confused, Kirat made a decision. She would take control of the situation. If Bobby wouldn't come to her, she would go to him. She would show up at his hotel and finally see him, whether he was ready or not. Her heart pounded as she walked into the grand hotel lobby, determined to find him. She approached the front desk and asked for Bobby, expecting at long last to be led to the man she had been waiting for all these years. But the receptionist's answer was like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no one by that name staying here." Kirat's voice breaking with disbelief. "But he said he was here. He told me." In that moment, everything Kirat had believed began to unravel. A cold, sinking feeling washed over her. Could Bobby have lied? Could he have deceived her, even about something as simple as where he was staying? Was this the moment when the truth, long buried beneath layers of excuses, began to emerge? Desperate for clarity, Kirat texted her cousin Simran, the one person she trusted above all others. Simran, as always, reassured her. Bobby had simply told the hotel not to reveal his presence, she said. He was just being cautious, protecting himself because of his dangerous situation. Kirat's voice, frustrated but resigned. Of course, that's it. Once again, Kirat found herself caught between the gnawing doubt in her mind and the love that still pulled at her heart. Bobby's stories, no matter how bizarre, always had an explanation, always had an excuse. But with each failed meeting, with every new obstacle, the cracks in Bobby's story were becoming harder to ignore. Kirat had always been strong, independent, and instinctive. And now, her instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. She had given so much, her time, her love, her trust, and yet, here she was, alone, confused and heartbroken. She still wanted to believe Bobby. She needed to believe that the man she loved was real. But the seeds of doubt had already been planted, and they were growing, taking root in her mind. With every failed promise, every missed opportunity, Kirat's faith began to erode. The cracks were widening, and the truth, whatever it was, seemed closer than ever. Determined to find answers, Kirat decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that Bobby wasn't who he claimed to be. And so she embarked on her own investigation, piecing together the fragments of her fractured reality. What Kirat discovered next would shatter her world and bring the truth crashing down around her. It was June 2018, nearly a decade since the first message from Bobby had landed in Kirat's inbox, an innocuous message that would spiral into a relationship full of hope, love, and, ultimately, crushing disappointment. After years of giving her heart to a man she thought she loved, Kirat had finally reached her breaking point. The doubts that had lingered in her mind for so long were no longer soft whispers. They were loud, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Bobby's excuses, his illnesses, his repeated refusals to meet in person, It all felt like a fragile house of cards, on the verge of collapsing under the weight of its own lies. Kirat had tried to trust him, had tried to believe in the man she thought she knew. But trust has its limits, and Kirat had reached hers. The sound of Kirat's voice, shaky but resolute, echoed in her mind. I need to know the truth. I have to know. In a final act of desperation, Kirat hired a private investigator. If Bobby was real, if his stories were true, she needed proof. And if they weren't, if her instincts were right, she needed to know that too. Within days, the PI had an answer for her, but it wasn't the answer she expected. Bobby wasn't in Kensington. In fact, he wasn't even close. He was in Brighton, almost 80 miles away. Kirat felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The man who had claimed to be near death so many times, who had kept her waiting for nearly 10 years, had lied about something as simple as his location. But this wasn't just a small lie, it was the tipping point. Kirat's breath quickened as the sound of jangling car keys filled the air. She knew what she had to do next. There was no hesitation. She had the address in hand, and nothing would stop her now. Kirat had to confront Bobby face to face, the man who had stolen nearly a decade of her life. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove. The journey felt like an eternity, but inside her mind, every second dragged painfully. What if this was finally it? What if she would finally lay eyes on the man who had held her heart hostage for all these years? Or worse, what if this was just another cruel twist in a game she was desperate to escape? Kirat's voice strained with emotion. What if he's lying again? What if there's nothing waiting for me at all? The sea air mingled with her anxiety as she neared Brighton, the unfamiliar streets closing in around her. Her heart raced as she pulled into a service station, taking a brief moment to steady herself. She could feel the weight of nearly 10 years pressing on her shoulders. But the moment wasn't long enough to quell the fear clawing at her chest. She typed the address into her GPS. The robotic voice chimed. Turn left in 300 yards. Kirat was close now, too close to turn back. Every instinct screamed for her to stop, to run from the truth she was about to uncover. But she had already given too much to this shadow of a man. There was no turning back. The hum of the car engine faded into the quiet of a suburban street. Footsteps echoed, slow and hesitant at first, then growing stronger as Kirat approached the house. It was an ordinary house, modest, unassuming, nothing like the glamorous places Bobby had always described. Kirat's hands trembled as she stood at the front door. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat like a drum in her ears. She stood there for what felt like an eternity before finally she knocked. The soft sound of her knuckles hitting the wood echoed in the silence, followed by stillness. No answer. She knocked again, this time harder, Kirat's voice shaky but firm. Bobby, I know you're in there. After what seemed like forever, the door creaked open. But the man who stood before her wasn't Bobby, not the Bobby she had fallen in love with. He was a stranger, an unfamiliar face looking back at her with confusion. Kirat's voice, desperate and confused. Who are you? For a moment, Kirat thought she had made a mistake. Maybe she had come to the wrong house. Maybe everything had been a misunderstanding. But as she looked closer, the truth began to unravel before her eyes. The man standing there had no idea who she was. He didn't know why she had come. And then, like a wave crashing over her, Kirat realized what had happened. The man she had known as Bobby, the man she had loved, had never existed, and the man in front of her, he was as much a victim as she was. He had no idea his photos and identity had been used to create the persona of Bobby. Kirat staggered backward, her mind spinning, her heart shattering. And then, it all clicked. The web of lies, the manipulation, the years of deceit, it all pointed to one person. One person who had been there for every moment of her heartbreak, who had offered comfort and advice. Kirat's voice, trembling with disbelief. It was her. It was Simran. Her cousin, her own flesh and blood. Simran, the one she had trusted completely, had been Bobby all along. In that moment, the weight of nearly 10 years of lies came crashing down on Kirat. The truth stood in front of her, undeniable and devastating. Simran had orchestrated everything: the love letters, the voice notes, the illnesses, the endless excuses. She had played both Bobby and every other character in his world, weaving an intricate web of deception. Kirat's world crumbled. Everything she thought she knew, everything she had believed, was gone. She had poured her heart into a relationship that had never existed, and the person behind it was someone she had loved and trusted. Kirat's voice, barely audible. How could she do this? How could she? But even with the truth out in the open, Kirat's journey wasn't over. The battle for justice against the cousin who had deceived her for nearly a decade was only just beginning. After the horrifying truth was laid bare, there was no going back. Kirat's entire world had been turned upside down. Simran, the cousin she had trusted, the one she had leaned on for comfort and advice, had orchestrated her misery for almost a decade. The revelation was crushing, but the next steps would prove to be even more daunting. Kirat needed justice. She needed answers, accountability, something solid to hold on to in the aftermath of such a cruel deception. Still reeling from the confrontation in Brighton, Kirat made the only choice she could. She went to the police. But what Kirat thought would be the start of her journey toward justice quickly turned into yet another battle. Kirat's voice, hesitant yet determined. "I was told to come here, to report this. I've been scammed, manipulated for nearly 10 years. She explained everything: the decade of deception, the false identities, the emotional toll. She handed over a mountain of evidence: messages, emails, voice recordings. Every detail was a breadcrumb that led back to Simran. But the officer didn't seem to grasp the gravity of it. Kirat's voice grows more strained. "It wasn't just online. It was my life. She took my life." Instead of concern, the officer's response was indifferent, cold even. He looked at the evidence, but to him, it wasn't a monumental betrayal or an elaborate scam. It was a domestic issue, a feud between cousins. No crime, no urgency. Kirat's voice, replayed from transcripts of her early meetings with the police. "You've just been duped," they said. "What crime has been committed against you?" Her case was passed from one department to another, shuffled between police stations in London and Brighton like a game of bureaucratic hot potato. No one wanted to take responsibility. Each time she followed up, she was met with more dismissive attitudes, the kind of cold bureaucracy that wears down even the strongest spirits. Kirat's breath is shaky. How can this be real? How can no one see what she did to me? For Kirat, this wasn't just an online scam. It was her life, her identity, and her future, all twisted by someone she loved. To the police, it was a strange family affair, a catfishing gone too far, but not a crime. And all the while, Simran remained untouched, her life continuing without consequence. The months dragged on. Kirat's life had been shattered, but nothing was being done to hold Simran accountable. While Kirat struggled with the emotional wreckage, Simran walked free, untouched by the law. She maintained her high-powered job, even securing a promotion. She traveled, attended parties, and posted about her seemingly perfect life online. Kirat's voice, barely above a whisper. "How can she just go on like nothing happened, like she didn't destroy my life?" It was unbearable. Kirat was trapped in a cycle of despair, while Simran seemed to be living her best life, untouched by the nightmare she had created. Kirat's voice cracking. "It's like I'm the one being punished, and she's the one who won." The system had failed her. Kirat wasn't just battling the emotional fallout of the scam, she was fighting an overwhelming sense of injustice. She felt abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect her. Kirat's voice, echoing her growing frustration. "Why can't they see what she's done? How can this not be a crime?" Her isolation deepened. Friends and family couldn't grasp the magnitude of what she had endured. Kirat, once a vibrant and outgoing woman, withdrew from the world, unable to articulate the full extent of the emotional scars. The shame, the fear, it consumed her. Kirat's breath, slow and heavy. I lost myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. She lost 38 kilograms in weight, her body wasting away under the pressure. The confident, lively woman she once was had become a shadow of her former self. Every phone call, every message now triggered anxiety. Kirat had lost her ability to trust in others, and most painfully, trust in herself. Kirat's voice, soft but pained. I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. Nightmares plagued her, replaying the deception over and over. Every moment of the past decade now felt like a lie. She questioned herself constantly. How had she not seen it sooner? How had Simran managed to fool her for so long? But despite the emotional devastation, Kirat knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let Simran get away with it. She couldn't let her cousin walk away unscathed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. About reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. Kirat's voice growing stronger. I just want her to be held accountable. That's all I've ever wanted. The police had failed her, and the legal system seemed indifferent to her suffering. But Kirat refused to give up. She turned to the only option left, civil action. If the police wouldn't take her case seriously, perhaps the courts would. Kirat's voice, calm but resolute. I had no choice. I had to do something. This wasn't about money. Kirat wanted a public apology, an acknowledgement of the pain Simran had caused. She wanted the world to see that what happened to her wasn't some minor family squabble. It was a serious violation, one that had destroyed years of her life. Kirat's voice, defiant. She can't just get away with it. And so, Kirat took the next step in her quest for justice. The fight wasn't over yet, but this time she wasn't fighting alone. With the police unwilling to act and every official avenue closed off, Kirat knew her battle for justice couldn't end there. She couldn't allow Simran to walk away unscathed, free of consequence after nearly a decade of lies and manipulation. It was no longer just about healing. It was about accountability. Kirat decided to take matters into her own hands. If the criminal justice system refused to hold Simran responsible, then perhaps the civil courts would. The decision to pursue civil litigation wasn't easy. It would mean enduring legal fees, court hearings, and the painful reliving of her trauma. But Kirat was resolute. She was determined to make Simran face the consequences, no matter how hard the journey ahead. In 2020, Kirat filed a lawsuit against Simran Bogle. The civil case claimed harassment, misuse of private information, and breaches of data protection law. But beyond the legal language, for Kirat, this case represented something much deeper. It was her way of forcing Simran to confront the truth. Kirat's voice, filled with quiet determination. I didn't care about the money. I wanted a public apology. I wanted people to know the truth. But Simran wasn't about to back down. Her legal team launched an aggressive defense, using a tactic that left Kirat stunned. They didn't just deny the allegations, they turned the tables, accusing Kirat of manipulation. In an extraordinary twist, Simran's lawyers claimed that Kirat had groomed Simran when she was still a schoolgirl, implying that Kirat was the true manipulator. Kirat's voice, tight with anger. They said I'd manipulated her, that I wanted her to play these roles. It was disgusting. The accusations were shocking, turning the case on its head. It felt like a gaslighting tactic, as though Simran's team was trying to reframe Kirat's suffering as something she had willingly participated in. The suggestion that Kirat had somehow orchestrated this was a cruel twist, but she refused to be silenced or shamed. The legal battle dragged on for months. Each day was emotionally exhausting, forcing Kirat to relive the most painful moments of her life in sterile courtrooms, surrounded by lawyers who dissected every detail. But Kirat held firm. Kirat's voice, calm but resolute. I just wanted her to admit what she had done, to apologize. That was all I wanted. Finally, after months of legal back and forth, Simran's lawyers made an offer, a settlement. No public trial, no media scrutiny, just an agreement to put everything behind them. Kirat would receive something in return, but not the public apology she had fought so hard for. Simran offered a private apology letter. It would admit guilt, but only in a controlled way. The letter could only be shared with a limited group of people, about 30, and it was never to be made public. Kirat's voice tinged with frustration. Even in the apology, she wanted control. She wanted to dictate how it would be shared, who could know the truth. When Kirat finally received the letter, it wasn't what she had hoped for. The words, though acknowledging wrongdoing, felt hollow. The letter didn't feel like it came from Simran. It felt like it had been carefully crafted by lawyers, designed to check boxes and avoid full responsibility. Kirat's voice reflecting on her disappointment. It didn't feel real. It was just words. There was no emotion, no remorse. It felt like another performance. Kirat had wanted genuine closure. She had wanted Simran to truly understand the gravity of what she had done, to take responsibility not just legally but emotionally. But instead, she was left with a letter that felt more like a legal maneuver than an apology. Still, it was something. For the first time, there was official acknowledgement that what Kirat had endured was real. Simran had admitted to the deception, to the manipulation, and to the emotional harm she had caused. On paper, at least, the truth was out. Kirat's voice, softly. It was a small victory, not what I wanted, but something. But even this acknowledgement couldn't erase the scars left behind. Kirat had lost nearly a decade of her life to a lie, and the pain of that time would stay with her forever. The letter marked the end of the legal battle, but it didn't close the emotional wounds. Kirat's voice, with quiet reflection, I don't know if I'll ever get the closure I need. But at least I've made her admit what she did. I've forced her to face it, even if it's not the way I wanted. Though the legal battle was over, Kirat's journey toward healing had only just begun. The years of deception had left deep emotional scars, and while the apology offered some measure of validation, it couldn't undo the damage. Kirat had fought to expose the truth, but in the end, the healing process was her next, and perhaps hardest, challenge. Kirat's fight for justice had brought her partway to where she wanted to be, but the next chapter, one of rebuilding, reclaiming her identity, and finding peace, was still unwritten. Kirat had won her civil case. The apology letter, private though it was, had been signed. In the eyes of the law, it was a victory, but for Kirat, it wasn't nearly enough. The years of deceit, manipulation, and emotional torment demanded more than just a settlement. It demanded true accountability. Despite Simran's admission of guilt in the civil case, the criminal justice system remained indifferent. The police had dismissed her pain as a simple online misunderstanding. They told her, bluntly, that no crime had been committed. Kirat's voice, defiant but weary. I was told, it's not a crime. I couldn't believe it. But Kirat wasn't ready to let go. She knew what had happened to her was criminally wrong, even if the police refused to see it. If they wouldn't act, she would find a way to make them. She had one last hope, an appeal to the Independent Office for Police Conduct IOPC. Kirat's voice, determined. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not again. In early 2020, with the civil case settled, Kirat filed her formal complaint with the IOP. She accused the police of mishandling her case, of failing to investigate properly, and of misunderstanding the gravity of what had happened. Kirat's complaint outlined how Simran had used coercive control, an illegal act under UK law, to manipulate and isolate her for years. She explained how the police had reduced her experience to nothing more than an online catfishing incident, ignoring the real emotional and psychological damage inflicted upon her. Kirat's voice, frustrated but calm. It wasn't just catfishing, it was control, it was coercion, it was years of manipulation. Months passed with no word from the IOP. Kirat waited, as she had so many times before, not knowing whether her plea would be taken seriously or dismissed like the countless other cries for help. But this time, something was different. When the letter finally arrived, it carried a glimmer of hope. The IOP had ruled in Kirat's favor. They found that Hounslow police had failed in their duty. They hadn't properly investigated Kirat's case. They hadn't even examined the evidence she had provided, evidence of coercive control, malicious communications, and harassment. The police had brushed aside her pain without truly understanding the depth of what had happened. Kirat's voice, cautiously optimistic. They told me I had a right to be heard, that the police had made mistakes. For the first time in years, Kirat's case was being taken seriously. The police would have to reconsider their decision to go back and look at the thousands of messages, voice recordings, and years of emotional abuse that Simran had inflicted upon her. Finally, there was hope that justice might be within reach. Kirat's voice, softly. It felt like I'd been fighting for so long, but now, finally, it felt like someone was listening. But Kirat's fight wasn't just about her. Throughout her battle, she couldn't help but think about the countless others who had suffered similar deception. The digital world had given rise to new forms of abuse, catfishing, online manipulation, emotional fraud, yet the law had not caught up. Her story wasn't unique. It was part of a growing crisis, one that left victims vulnerable and without legal protection. Kirat's voice, reflective. How many others are out there? How many have been deceived like me and are just told it's not a crime? Catfishing. To many, it sounds like a harmless online prank. But Kirat's story showed how sinister it could be, how emotional fraud and manipulation could stretch over years, isolating victims and controlling their lives. It wasn't just an online game, it was a form of abuse. And yet, legal systems around the world, including the UK, still struggled to understand the full impact of this crime. Kirat's voice, somber. It's emotional torture. There's no other way to describe it. Even now, there's no specific law in the UK against catfishing. While coercive control is recognized as a crime, catfishing often falls through the cracks, especially when it's not tied to physical harm or financial fraud. The law hadn't yet evolved to handle the psychological devastation caused by this kind of deception. Kirat's case highlighted the gaps, showing how easily perpetrators could evade justice while victims were left to pick up the pieces. Kirat's voice, quietly. We need laws that reflect the damage this does. Kirat's case was a warning about the dangers of digital deception and the emotional harm it can cause. It also revealed a blind spot in the legal system, where victims of catfishing are too often dismissed, their suffering treated as a private matter rather than a serious offense. But despite this, Kirat's story was also one of hope. Her fight, her determination to be heard, could pave the way for change. Kirat's voice, resolute. I'm not just fighting for me, I'm fighting for everyone who's been through this. With the IOC involved and the police investigation reopened, Kirat's pursuit of justice finally had momentum. The evidence would be reevaluated, and the system that had once failed her was being forced to reconsider its stance. But even as the legal wheels began to turn, one question lingered, haunting Kirat's every thought. Why? Why had Simran done it? What could possibly drive someone to manipulate another person so thoroughly for so long? Despite everything she had endured, Kirat still didn't have that answer. And with the investigation now reopened, she clung to the hope that, perhaps, one day, she would finally understand what had driven Simran to cause so much pain. Kirat's voice, quietly wondering, why did she do it? What was it all for? Even as the legal system began to take notice, the mystery at the heart of Kirat's torment remained unresolved. For Kirat, uncovering the why was perhaps the final piece in her journey toward healing and closure. Why did Simran Bogle, a seemingly bright, ambitious, and trusted cousin, construct such a complex web of lies that entrapped Kirat for nearly a decade? What drove her to invent an entire alternate reality, complete with multiple fictional characters, and manipulate someone she was meant to care for? What could possess someone to take on not just one identity, but many, over so many years? Kirat's voice, pensive. I've asked myself that same question 1,000,000 times over. Why? And I still don't really know. Was it jealousy, a need for control, or perhaps an insatiable desire for attention? Or was there something deeper, hidden beneath the surface, that even Simran herself couldn't understand? Psychologists often speak of the allure of power in these kinds of situations, how some individuals find a sense of superiority in manipulating others, pulling their strings like a puppeteer. For nearly a decade, Kirat was that puppet, unknowingly playing a role in Simran's elaborate game. But was control really the only motive? maybe Simran's desire went beyond control. Perhaps it wasn't just about domination, but about creating a world where she held all the power as the omnipotent storyteller. In this fantasy world, she could cast herself in any role, the loving cousin, the concerned friend, the romantic interest, but it was all a facade, none of it was real. And yet she maintained this elaborate deception for years. Why? Kirat's voice hesitant. I don't think I'll ever know for sure, but then, maybe she doesn't know either. There was, however, one document that offered a fleeting glimpse into Simran's mind, a rare moment where Simran tried to explain her actions, not through her lawyers, but in her own words. It was a personal apology letter, a draft that Kirat received before the formal lawyer-crafted version. It was a rare moment of apparent vulnerability. Kirat's voice reflective. It wasn't the formal one. That one didn't even feel like it came from her. This was different. This was personal. Simran began the letter by acknowledging the damage she had caused, the years of pain she had inflicted. She expressed regret, claiming she wished she could undo everything. But the part that stood out most to Kirat wasn't the apology itself. It was Simran's attempt at an explanation. Kirat's voice. She said we were both in a dark place, that living in this fantasy she'd created somehow brought us both happiness. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. Simran claimed that the alternate world she created, this web of lies, wasn't about control. It was about escaping from reality. In her mind, the deception provided both of them with a kind of relief, a warped sense of connection and happiness. But for Kirat, there was no escape. This world was not a fantasy. It was a nightmare. Simran, it seemed, had convinced herself that her actions were not entirely malicious, that somehow this manipulation had been a benefit to both of them. It was a twisted justification, a way to excuse her behavior. But Kirat knew that no amount of rationalization could undo the immense damage that had been done. Kirat's voice, determined but somber. She tried to explain it away, tried to make it seem like it wasn't all bad, but she was wrong. It was all bad. For me, at least. Kirat has thought about this letter often. It haunts her because it's the closest she's ever come to understanding why Simran did what she did. But even with Simran's explanation, it feels hollow. Was Simran truly remorseful? Did she even fully understand the extent of the pain she had caused? Or was this just another layer of manipulation, an attempt to maintain control over the narrative, even as she claimed to be apologizing? Kirat's voice quietly. I'll never know if she really meant it, and I've had to accept that. In the end, Kirat may never fully grasp why Simran did what she did. The years of deceit, the emotional manipulation, the stolen time, it's a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Simran's apology, while revealing in parts, left more questions than answers. And perhaps Kirat has come to understand that's okay. Kirat's voice, stronger now, resolute. I don't need to know why. I don't need to understand her to reclaim my life. For so long, Kirat had been trapped by the need for answers, by the weight of Simran's manipulation. But now, with the court case behind her and the apology letter in hand, she realizes that some mysteries will never be fully solved. And that's fine. Because this story is no longer about Simran, it's about Kirat. It's about her resilience, her strength, and her ability to take back control of her own life. Kirat's voice, confident. It's about me now, moving forward, leaving her behind. There will always be unanswered questions. Simran's true motives may remain an enigma, buried deep within her. But for Kirat, what matters most now is that she no longer seeks answers from the person who once held power over her. The truth she needed was not about Simran, it was about herself. Kirat's voice, softly, with finality. She doesn't get to control the story anymore. Despite the lingering uncertainty, despite the why that may never be fully explained, Kirat is finally ready to move on. Simran's motives, twisted and unclear as they may be, no longer define her. The most important thing Kirat has found is her own sense of peace. And that, more than any apology or explanation, is the real victory. After years of deceit, manipulation, and unimaginable betrayal, Kirat has begun the slow and intentional process of healing. It hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been quick. But with each step forward, Kirat makes a conscious decision to reclaim what was taken from her and to rewrite her story, this time on her own terms. One of the first things Kirat does is return to a place that brought her joy before her life was turned upside down, her radio show at Desi Radio. For years, the microphone had been her connection to her community and the world. But after Simran's deception came to light, the thought of stepping back into the studio seemed impossible. How could she face the world when her trust had been shattered so completely? But Kirat is stronger than she knows. It was scary. I hadn't gone on air since everything came out. I didn't know if people would look at me differently, if they'd see me as weak or gullible. But I had to push through that. I had to remind myself that this is my passion, and no one, not even Simran, can take that away from me. Returning to her show is more than just resuming a job. It's a statement, a declaration to the world and to herself that she is moving forward. Despite everything she's endured, she refuses to let Simran's betrayal define her. This is the beginning of a new chapter, one where Kirat is firmly in control. For so long I was lost in someone else's story. Now, I'm writing my own. But healing isn't just about going back to what once was, it's about building something new. Kirat is learning to trust again, to open herself up to the world, and to form new connections. This has meant daring to explore the possibility of love once more. I went on my first date in what felt like forever. It was terrifying. After everything I'd been through, the idea of trusting someone again seemed impossible. But I knew that if I didn't try, I'd be letting Simran win. And I can't let her take any more from me. Dating again is a huge step for Kirat. It's not just about the potential for love, it's about rediscovering parts of herself that she thought had been lost forever. The woman who once dreamed of starting a family, traveling the world, and living a life filled with joy and adventure, that woman is still there. And now, Kirat is determined to find her again. I'm still me. I still have dreams. I still want to travel the world, to fall in love, to build the life I always wanted. And now, I know I can. There are still days when the weight of what happened threatens to pull her back. Memories of the lies, the manipulation, and the stolen years sometimes feel too heavy to bear, but Kirat has emerged stronger. She faced the truth when it was unbearable, fought for justice when the system didn't support her, and learned to carry the emotional scars with grace. I've been through hell, but I'm still standing. I refuse to let what she did define me. This is my life, and I'm taking it back. Kirat's story is no longer about what was done to her. It's about what she's doing now, about the future she's building for herself. Yes, the scars remain. The trauma will always be part of her, but it no longer controls her path. Kirat is more than a victim. She is more than the sum of Simran's lies. Kirat is a survivor, a woman determined to reclaim her future and live life on her own terms. This story isn't just about deception, it's about resilience. It's about the strength to fight for justice, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about finding the courage to trust again, to love again, and to truly live again. Kirat's story may not be over, but this chapter is about healing. It's about moving forward. I'm not the same person I was before all this happened. I'm stronger, I'm wiser, and I know that my best days are still ahead of me. Kirat's journey is a powerful reminder that, no matter how dark the past may seem, there is always light ahead. Even after the deepest betrayal, it's possible to rebuild, to reclaim, and to rise. Kirat has found her strength, her voice, and her future. And now she's stepping into that future, free from the shadows of the past. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you've made it to this point, drop a comment with the word "done," and we'll give you a personal shout-out to show our appreciation. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive in this murder and media frenzy. It was as fascinating for us to create as we hope it was for you to hear. If you found this episode thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We also invite you to join our YouTube channel, where you can get early access to our content, have your questions answered directly, and enjoy exclusive members-only content. We'd love to know what you think about this case. Was justice truly served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We're always eager to hear your thoughts. For those wanting to explore more on true crime, we've included Amazon affiliate links to some of the books we referenced in our researches. Purchasing through the link won't cost you anything extra, but it will support the channel and help us continue bringing you more content. If you're craving even more, consider joining our Patreon community. As a member, you'll get access to the full script of this episode, exclusive book summaries, and even the complete set of images featured in this case, available for purchase in our Patreon store. This has been 22 Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.